Welcome to Angels Among Us. Especially at Christmas time, we become aware of angels, and then throughout the year they seem to fade from our memory. But they are a very important part of creation. And so maybe we need to take a closer look to see what their purpose is. Do we really need them around? Do they fly? Who becomes an angel? And so on. So let's look at first the next slide, which talks about what angels are. Angels, called malach in Hebrew. There's archangels, there are cherubim and seraphim. There are a variety of angels. Now, the cherubim and seraphim we will not address here. Those are the little angels that sometimes appear as if they are babies buzzing around the throne of God. And they're what psychologists would call white noise, continually praising God in heaven. But in this lesson, in this study, I want to address those messenger angels. So first, malach, or angel, means simply messenger. And what is the purpose of the angels? They're created to bring messages to humans from God, pure spirits, contingent on God for their being and for their action. The angel is created for a specific purpose, and when the purpose is completed, the angel disappears from view. But other angels, like Gabriel and Michael, seem to exist throughout history, and they remain at the beck and call of the Divine One. The rewarding of angels for tasks well done, as we like to see in the end of It's a Wonderful Life with Clarence when he gets his wings, is beautiful myth, but it has nothing to do with the truth about angels. You can look into Genesis chapter 18 and see about Abraham, and Genesis in chapter 19 about Lot. The question is, do angels fly? Well, not exactly. They appear, they disappear, but they do not fly. There's nothing in all of the study of angels, which is called angelology. There's nothing that would give us indication that angels actually fly. But they do interact with humans. If you're familiar with the story of Abraham and Sarah, you know that there were angels that came to speak, the three angels that came to speak with Abraham. In Jacob, he wrestled with the angel. Jesus, they show up to taunt him in the wilderness and then to give him aid. They can block human actions, as when Jesus was asked to give his angels command to block the suffering on the cross. But he did not do that. He chose instead to fulfill his mission. So angels mostly make announcements, as we also see in the tomb on the day of resurrection. Let's go further into this study of angels. The next slide. Do angels get rewarded? We've covered that. Now the question, can people become angels? You can find the answer to that question in Psalm 8, where in fact we read that humans are created a little lower than the angels for the glory of God, and then upon our resurrection into eternity, we take our place, our rightful place, as those who are on a level with all the saints who have departed in history. That also begs the question about babies. If a baby dies young, will that baby become an angel? And although that is a very sweet sympathy, it is not truth. Babies, adults, no matter what the age of a human, we do not become angels, for angels are created as a separate being, a separate order. So the big question is, how do we distinguish the work of the Holy Spirit from the workings and the mission of the angels among us? That we'll discover as we move through this study, that there are times when we have an inside feeling that the Spirit is reaching out to us. But if we have a dream or a vision and there is someone talking with us or someone guiding us along the way, as several of you have shared with me since they began reading this study, those are angelic visitations to us. And by the way, angels didn't even have wings in artistic reproduction until the 4th century. Prior to that, they were wingless. I think we've added the whirring wings just to have this wonderful sense of something different. So when you travel around or send your greetings this Christmas and they have angels with wings, that's okay. It's just not real, but it's okay. They're there, and it gives us some sense of what an angel is. So this study is going to focus on 5 angelic appearances: the angel visitation to Zechariah in the temple, the Annunciation to Mary, The dream appearance to Joseph, actually 3 dream appearances to Joseph, the angelic and heavenly host appearance to the shepherds outside of Bethlehem, and the star apparition to the Magi. Each tells us something new about angels and may lead us to a deeper understanding of how God orchestrated the incarnation in Jesus, called the Christ. And so we move into the different angels. First, we see Uriel, the archangel of light. Next slide is Michael, the archangel protector. He's still around. Next slide is Raphael, an archangel of healing. Those of you familiar with healing arts, especially the Asian healing arts, will know that the green color is the color of healing, and Raphael is depicted in those colors. The next slide shows us Lucifer, the day star angel, along with Satan the adversary. Sometimes the 2 of these are looped together as one or linked together as one. In fact, there are 2 different beings, and you can read further on that in the Apocrypha. And Malach Hamavet is the angel of death, the one you want to avoid. The difficulty for many people is when an angel makes an appearance, particularly in Old Testament times. There was a sense that if an angel appeared to you, you were being summoned into eternal life, and a lot of people were afraid of angels. This is the only one that we really need to fear. And finally, Gabriel, the archangel messenger, and he's the one who features prominently in our Christmas angels story. So let us move from angels specifically into the temple, and I want to talk a little bit about what the Temple Mount is all about before we move into the apparition to Zechariah. So this is the temple, and I wanted you to notice this is today. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is the gold-domed building that you see almost in the center of your picture. To the lower left, you'll see the wall kind of goes around, and there's a pathway around, and there's another building sticking out there. That's actually where the original temple was. The entire area now is inhabited by a lot of other items, but the trees encircle the pathway where the original Temple Mount is. This is the western wall, or the Wailing Wall, and you can see the mosque, Golden Dome in the background, and also the Tower of David. And those would be along the inside to the east of where the temple is. Now this slide I'm focusing on is the showing of Herod's temple and Solomon's. Solomon's original temple was within the red and green lines, as you see on the slide. And then Herod extended the temple later and enlarged the compound. So looking at this slide, you'll see in, again, almost the center, there's a word temple, and next to it, a red square. That red square is the Holy of Holies. That's the very inside of the entire temple complex. And it is in there that the priest will go once a year to offer praise and prayer to God. Now, when a priest would enter into the Holy of Holies, there was only one at a time. No one else was even in the altar area. And there was grave concern for a priest could not enter to rescue another priest. And so if an extended period of time went by and no one came out, they had no way to see what was going on inside. So throughout history, the priestly class devised a method which was to tie a rope to the foot of the priest that was going into the Holy of Holies, so that if he didn't come out in due time, they would give him a yank, and if he didn't resist, they would drag him out, and that would resolve that particular problem. But as you can see in this diagram, there's the temple and the Holy of Holies, and then the altar is in the lower right-hand part of that square. And that's the place that the priests, including Zechariah, would go to offer prayers. And this was done twice a day, that someone would go in and burn incense and offer prayers. You can research incense more intensely if you wish to, but in essence, incense is the way that prayers rise from earth to heaven. And so the incense was burned, and the priest would offer prayer in the temple. And that's the place that we would find Zechariah as he's offering prayer. To the right of that is actually moving eastward is the men's court and the inner aisles. The men would either stand or sit in the seats, and then down a series of steps into the courtyard, where there is the bath, and then the wine and oil press, the wood box where they kept the wood for heating, and in the lower right-hand corner, just by the east gate, you'll see something called Nazarites. Nazarites were a class of people who had particular insights or particular circumstances where they were called into a special holiness, like an ecstatic expression or self-dedication to be pure and holy for God. So like Samuel, they lived in the holy place of the temple, and they forsook all other earthly pleasures, such as wine, family, and also the cutting of their hair. As the role developed, it became less spontaneous and more of an individual choice. Persons were consecrated for a particular period of time, often for 30 days, and at the end of that time, it was tradition that they would cut their hair and offer it as a sacrifice upon the altar for their time of dedication in the temple. So the areas outside of the main part, if you see in the bottom left-hand corner of the diagram, there is the court of the Gentiles. And that's the area where the vendors would have been that would sell pigeons or young goat for folk coming in who wanted to make their sacrifices to the altar. But if they came from great distances, they couldn't harvest those animals early on and drag them along for a week, or they would be quite disintegrated. So it was possible, and actually the locals gave permission for the vendors to sell pigeons and young goats in the court of the Gentiles. Now that's the area that you will remember that Jesus went in and overturned the tables of the vendors because they were jacking the prices up so high and really robbing the people right within the space where God was being worshipped. So that's another important part, which is a little bit of an aside to Christmas, but an important piece to note. And then on the upper portion, if you go back to the temple where the red dot is, and on your screen you can see there's a red line going inside the green, and that's where the cloisters are, and so that's where the priests would stay when they are on duty. And they would come in for a week at a time, usually, to be serving in the temple. They would sleep in those cloistered quarters and then be in prayer as they either were in by the altar or someone was in and they were praying with them. So what would happen is and this happened with Zechariah, when Zechariah went inside to the altar to offer prayers on incense, the rest of the priests would go silent in the court, and they would all be in prayer with him, much as we are doing now by internet, by online and streaming, when we are worshiping in our homes and something is going on live in the sanctuary. We believe that our spiritual presence is all one. And so the priests would be in that outer courtyard, and with Zechariah being inside by the altar. So Zechariah and Elizabeth, a lovely elder couple, lived beautiful lives. They were beyond reproach. They both came from upstanding classes. Zechariah was a member of the 8th division of the priests of Aaron, and it was to Aaron's folk that serving in the temple fell. And Elizabeth was also a descendant of the priestly clan. So Aaron was set apart to consecrate the most holy things, that he and his sons forever should burn incense before the Lord and minister to him and pronounce blessings in his name. So every male over the age of 20 in this tribe was required to be in service to the Lord. And they rotated their time, serving 1 week every 6 months approximately. For the week they were in service, as I mentioned, they lived in quarters in the Temple Mount. So being thousands of priests in his tribe, it is no small notation that Zechariah drew the lot of offering the incense in the temple at the altar. It was a great honor for Zechariah to be chosen to do this. Not everyone would ever get the chance in all of the time that they were serving. And there were 2 times, morning and afternoon or early evening, that the sacrifices were made. And we don't really know at which one Zechariah entered the temple and then had the encounter with the angel. So he was inside, and the holy moment of ancient ritual that he was offering his prayers to God, in the midst of that ritual, he was interrupted by the sudden appearance of an angel. And can you just imagine being there, whether you're lay or clergy, being in prayer and having an angel interrupt your very thought, your very prayers, your words? And there was that angel standing on the right side of the altar. I'm going to move the slide forward so we can, that's another picture of the temple. And here we are, the side of the altar with Zechariah in this picture on the right of the altar, And this depiction of an angel with wings, this is a later artistic interpretation, this angel appearing, and we know that this one is Gabriel because he says so. So Zechariah is offering his prayers. The angel shows up, and Zechariah is absolutely petrified. He's old, remember? And he hasn't, he's been aware that he hasn't, although he hasn't been ill, it's certainly possible that his time is coming. So when the angel shows up, no gleaming lights, no whirring of wings, no halos, the angel simply shows up, and Zechariah is petrified. And we really don't need to judge him too harshly for being afraid, because as I said earlier, angels, the presence of angels often meant bad news for the one to whom they were appearing. So what could this angel want? He might have been thinking, is Elizabeth okay? He would think about his wife as well. And am I about to die? So these questions were racing through his mind as he tried to figure out what was happening. And then Gabriel said what angels often do, do not be afraid. Your prayer is heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son. Well, if you're Zechariah and you're 85, 90 years old, and your wife is a similar age, and an angel tells you you're going to have a baby, you're probably going to be shaking your head like, yeah, right, this isn't going to happen. We preachers use that a lot. But the reality is that Zechariah is disbelieving. How could it possibly be so, even though the angel is a messenger of the divine one? So now what? And now they want the boy's name to be John. And John is not a name in the history of this family. So Zechariah is standing there sort of dumbfounded, as you were, and he doesn't know what to do. So like everyone confronted by an angel, Zechariah asks questions, he gives an excuse, and then he asks for a sign. So how am I to know this? I'm an old man, my wife is an old woman. The angel says, hey, Zach, I'm Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. I was sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. I think if anyone plays the role of the angel in this presentation, in any presentation of this experience, you're probably going to hear those exasperated tones in their voice. So Zechariah asks for a sign, and I think we probably all would do the same thing. An angel shows up and tells us something that's a really, really almost incredible. And like, okay, not only how is it going to happen, but give me a sign, show me how this is going to happen. How often we wish that God would give us signs from just about anything. Wouldn't it be nice if God would write on our bathroom mirror or tack a note on our refrigerator door what it is God wants us to do next? That doesn't usually happen, I let you know. So we would be speechless in the presence of the messenger of God. So what happens? His punishment, his sign, is that he gets to be speechless. Now that's a very fitting punishment for this crime. So Zechariah was delayed in leaving the altar as the angel disappeared, and the people outside were getting impatient, and they were worried that something ill had befallen him. And again, we can understand that. Zechariah trying to regain his composure, trying to figure out what on earth he's going to do. How is he going to respond to this particular thing? And here's another image of the angelic presence. The previous one was much more depiction. This is much more of a cloud, a smoke. And then we have Zechariah, the next slide, Zechariah leaving the temple. And you can see him kind of faltering, trying to find his way. He's absolutely astounded by not only what he has seen and heard, but by the fact that this sign is now coming true for him, that he is completely unable to speak, to give out any message from his mouth. He finally leaves the altar area of the temple, and the people know immediately that something had happened to him. For usually when the priest comes out from the altar, he pronounces a blessing on the people as he leaves, and Zechariah wasn't able to do that. And so I'm sure he gestured to them, but they believed that he had received a vision. Luke doesn't let us know about their responses. How would we react to a priest, or any person for that matter, who had just experienced a vision from God? And Zechariah did not go home immediately because he was in the middle of his week of service. And so he had to stay in the cloister in his little room for the rest of the week in the temple, trying to grasp what on earth was going on, going to prayer, in this case silent prayer, all the time, but not really knowing what was going to happen, and maybe even with a little fear that Gabriel would return with more good news. And maybe even the other priests avoided him because he was different, he was strange. Perhaps he mulled in his mind how he was going to tell Elizabeth and what her reaction to be. And we can begin to question, how would you, as an elder woman, react if your husband came home from temple service and told you that he was about to get you pregnant? I'm sure she would be a little bit astounded and also like, oh no, you've got to be kidding. So there was no indication that this is not a natural conception. We don't have the same angel overshadowing that Mary has. And so we know that they are enjoying each other in the fullness of their marriage. But it might have been some time because they're of advanced age, and this was going to be a different process for both of them. We do know that after some time, and we don't know exactly how long, Elizabeth conceived. And she hid herself away for 5 months because early on, it was believed that people that were not able to conceive and have children had sins that they had not confessed. And we already know that Elizabeth and Zechariah likely did not have sins. They were declared in the Bible to be righteous people. So she wanted to also wait until the pregnancy was well along in case she would have a miscarriage, and she wanted her story to be believable. Some have suggested that there was some degree of embarrassment or shame in being so old and being with child. Her reproach among men and women was already known. Others have suggested that the time was meant to coincide with Mary's visit, so that the quickening or first felt movement of the child within her would be the connection of John with Jesus. This is probably a later gloss on the part of Luke, but it's an interesting thing to think about. So the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth concludes in chapter 1, verses 57 to 80. With John, this is Luke, with John's birth and naming, the opening of Zechariah's mouth to speak, and his lengthy poetic prophecy. So there's some questions to think about in this story. I'm moving forward to Zechariah being silent, and then here he is sitting with his very, very pregnant wife, Elizabeth. Do you think that it is coincidence that Zechariah drew the lot to offer prayers of incense? Might it be important to be about the sacred task when the angel appears? So that brings into mind for us, what do we expect to happen when we are praying? And do we expect any response to occur to us or to be present to us? I'm sure that Zechariah had prayed for years to have a child and never expected that prayer to be fulfilled as they got into advanced age. And then he was probably praying for the people of Israel and for salvation of Israel from the Romans who had invaded their territory. And standing there at prayer, offering prayers via incense to God, and not really believing, perhaps, that those prayers would be answered so immediately. His prayer was probably that it would come about in the time that he was yet given to see. But he's in the midst of a task of praying and on behalf of others. We would call that intercessory prayer when the angel appears to him. So that might be something to think about. The next question is, would you be offended if you were Zechariah by this angel and give the same response that Zechariah gave? And how would you respond to the angel telling you that you had a special task to do for God that was really, really extraordinary? Do you think you would recognize an angel if it were in your space? What characteristics can you identify that would help you to know it is an angel? And I heard recently, the latest story I've heard about angels is that someone had a newspaper that had some very important information in it that they were saving to share with family, and the paper was accidentally tossed out with the recycling. And not long after that, a gentleman came to the door carrying a paper and tapped on the door, and the person who told me the story answered it. And the person outside said, I think you might be needing this, and handed the paper over to him. And he went inside to give the paper to his wife, and went back to the door to thank the man, and the guy was completely disappeared. That's the kind of thing that an angel would do. He has a task, he completes it, and he's gone. They can appear, reappear, disappear. I don't think he flew away, but he certainly could have been there for that moment. So they bring news to us, special tasks of things that we need. Sometimes they just come to us when we need comfort, and we feel that presence so genuinely. We're not told how Elizabeth responded when Zechariah turned mute from temple duty and communicated to her that she would bear a son. How do you think she might have responded? Was she joy-filled that she would finally have a son, or a child, they told a son, after all of those years? Did she have some fears about being pregnant at an elder age? Did she have concerns, as many of us do that have our children in later years, that they wouldn't be around to guide him when he became an adult? Was she concerned for her own health and safety? Would this pregnancy cause her to die? As back in those days, there wasn't the good medical care that we have today for pregnant mothers and delivery. She could have certainly died as a result of this pregnancy and the delivery of John. So there's a lot of things for her to be concerned about. And I ask, if you're of an older age, how would you respond? Women, if you were told you were going to be pregnant at an elder age. Men, if you were told that your wife was going to be pregnant at an elder age, and what kinds of complications might you consider that would be for you? So then we move forward, and John was born. The ritual of circumcision and naming was upon them. The community was gathered, and they assumed that, of course, that the child would carry on the father's name, which was tradition in ancient Jewish culture. And Elizabeth, because remember, Zechariah couldn't yet speak, proclaimed a different name. She said, his name will be John. And everybody went, John, what? And then they all looked to Zechariah to see what he would say. And he nodded affirmation, yes, his name will be John. And when he agreed to that, his voice returned. What an incredible experience that must have been for him, probably just about as ecstatic as when he was first made mute in the temple that long ago. So he proclaimed the name of his son. Why do you think the locals might have been afraid when they saw that Zechariah, who had been speechless, could now speak? That certainly is quite a moment for people to look at, and perhaps they were afraid. And if so, what would they be afraid of? Something to think about. And why do you think that Luke included this story about Elizabeth and Zechariah and John? How important is this episode to the whole story of Christmas? Think about, would we still have the same Christmas story if we didn't have Elizabeth and Zechariah, and later John? John would be Jesus' cousin. We didn't have this story, so that when Mary would have gone maybe to visit friends, but she wouldn't have been to see Elizabeth. And that whole story in Luke about Mary's response to Elizabeth's child jumping within the womb, and the Magnificat, my soul magnifies the Lord, that would not have been a part of the Christmas story either. So perhaps we can think about the angelic visitation to Zechariah and how important it was for him to be the first one to know about the beginning of the Christmas story. And how does this angelic visitation usher into our thoughts the beginning of angels and Christmas? Something to ponder very carefully. And that, my friends, is the conclusion of the first lesson.